Welcome to Yara Greyjoy, Lady of the Iron Islands, a Game of Thrones story. Before Theon betrayed Winterfell, before dragons returned to the skies, there was a girl born of salt and iron, who would become the fiercest sea captain in the Iron Islands. This is her story. This is the legend of Yara Greyjoy, a Game of Thrones tale you've never heard until now. Written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Gwyneth Paltrow. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The sea gives, the sea takes. The wind howled through the towers of Pyke like a beast in mourning. Rain battered the iron castle, as though the sea itself were trying to reclaim its own. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning painted the cliffs in ghostlight. Yara Greyjoy stood barefoot in the hall outside her mother's chamber, her arms crossed, her jaw set. 8 years old, wild-haired and storm-eyed, she waited as servants bustled in and out with wet cloths, steaming basins, and urgent whispers. Her nursemaid had tried to keep her away, but Yara had bitten her and run. This was her brother being born. Balon Greyjoy emerged at last, tall and sharp as a drawn blade, his salt-crusted cloak dragged behind him, wet with spray and storm. He looked down at his daughter with something close to indifference. "He's born," he said. "A son." Yara's heart leapt in her chest. "Can I see him?" she asked. Balon stared at her a moment, then gave a small grunt that could have meant anything. But he stepped aside. Inside, Alanis Greyjoy lay pale and sweat-drenched, her eyes closed. In her arms was a bundle of wriggling flesh wrapped in sea-damp linens. Yara crept forward. The baby squawked and hiccuped, his little fists balled like he was ready to fight the world. Yara knelt beside her mother and leaned in close. "What's his name?" Alanis opened her eyes. "Theon," Yara grinned. "I'll protect him." That night, Balon stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea with his newborn in his arms, his daughter beside him, soaked to the skin. "The sea gives," he said, voice deep and proud, "and the sea takes. Remember that, girl." Yara looked up at him, confused. What did the sea take? Balon didn't answer. He simply turned and walked back into the tower, leaving her alone on the slick black rocks, the spray of the ocean cold on her face. Rodrik and Meryn came back from the Shield Islands weeks later, bearing wounds and laughter. Rodrik, broad as a barrel, carried her on his shoulders. Meryn, lithe and fast, taught her how to slip a blade from her boot without being noticed. They adored her, and she adored them. At night they all slept in the same chamber, with Theon's cradle between their beds. When he cried, Yara sang to him, rough songs of krakens and kings. When he laughed, Rodrik swore the boy would be a captain one day. But peace does not last in the Iron Islands. By the time Theon could crawl, Balon was calling his bannermen. The drums echoed from tower to tower. Men sharpened axes and repainted shields with krakens. Black sails were raised in secret. "We do not sow," Balon said, standing before his children as he donned his armor. "We take what is ours. The old way will rise again." Rodrik and Meryn would lead the first strike. The day they left, Yara clung to Rodrik's cloak. "You'll come back, right?" He tousled her hair. "Of course. Who else'll keep Meryn from getting himself killed?" Meryn winked. "Don't let father make you soft." They sailed off with the tide, their longships vanishing into the mist. Yara stayed on the cliffs until the sun set. Theon cried behind her, and for the first time, she didn't turn to comfort him. They never came back. The news came by Raven. Burned ships, crushed bodies. The rebellion was broken. The Iron Islands had bent the knee. The cost, Rodrik and Meryn. Yara didn't cry, not at first. Balon said only, "They died as Ironborn." Alanis collapsed. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. Yara brought her food, held Theon to her breast for warmth, and slept on the cold floor beside them. And then came the Northmen. Lord Eddard Stark arrived with words sharper than steel. Theon would be taken as ward, hostage in truth, to ensure Balon's obedience. One wrong move, and the boy would die. Balon raged, but he bent. He kissed Theon once on the forehead, an act that shocked everyone, and handed him over. Yara stood on the dock, dressed in black, her fists clenched so tight her nails bled into her palms. The boy, barely a toddler, reached out for her as the Stark men carried him away. His voice was too small to speak her name, but his eyes searched for her face until he vanished into the fog. That night, Yara went to the cliffs alone. She stood on the edge and screamed until her voice broke. She never cried again. Not when she took her first blade. Not when she bled her first kill. Not when the sea tried to take her with it. Instead, she whispered a phrase she had learned from the drowned men, carved into driftwood and spoken over graves. What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger. She was done mourning. It was time to rise. Chapter 2. The Kraken's Ambition. Pyke stank of salt, rot, and silence. It had been nearly a year since Theon was taken. Alanis Greyjoy remained cloistered in her chambers, gaunt and ghost-like, a woman hollowed out by grief. Servants said she spoke only to the waves now. Balon never visited her. He never visited anyone unless it served his ambition. Yara, now 9, walked the keep like a shadow with teeth. The girl who once sang lullabies to her baby brother now trained daily with iron and fury. She slept in the barracks, not her chamber. She cut off her braids and wore a sailor's knot at her belt. Her food came from the soldier's fire pit, not the high table. "I'm not your little kraken anymore," she had told her father. Balon didn't argue. He never did. The Iron Islands were quiet under the thumb of the Iron Throne, but rebellion still stirred in Balon's chest like smoke in a chimney. He spoke in low tones with his bannermen, plotted trade routes that doubled as raiding paths, and held secret gatherings with the drowned men. Yara wasn't invited. Not yet. So she made herself necessary in other ways. She polished the armor. She mapped the tide patterns. She snuck into the blacksmith's forge and learned how to balance a reaver's axe on the crook of her elbow. When Balon's steward complained, she knocked out 2 of his teeth. That got Balon's attention. "She's no lady," the steward had spat. "She's a Greyjoy," Balon replied. One night, Yara snuck into the salt cellar, an underground chamber where raiding captains kept their trophies. Shattered shields, Lannister helms, the broken masthead of a Tyrell galley. Each item hung with a story. She traced a finger along a cracked iron crown. Roderick's. Beneath it lay Meryn's dagger, still blood-stained. She gripped the hilt. "You should be sleeping," a voice said. She spun, blade up. It was Yara Greyjoy, her uncle, gaunt and wild-eyed, robes still damp from whatever ritual he'd crawled out of. The drowned god's voice, they called him. "You dishonor the dead by stealing from them," he said calmly. "I wasn't stealing." "Then why are you crying?" "I'm not." He nodded, and for once he didn't argue. That winter, Balon took her on her first voyage. Not as a passenger, as crew. The ship was the Iron Kiss, a battered longship with barnacles clinging to its flanks and a figurehead in the shape of a screaming woman. Its captain was Harrick Sharpnose, a surly bastard who'd once strangled a mutineer with a wet rope and never stopped smelling like brine. "Take the girl if you must," he told Balon, "but I won't carry her back if she cries." "She won't," Balon replied. "She's not her mother." Yara stood on the prow as the Iron Kiss cut through icy waters, wind in her face, fire in her chest. The sea welcomed her not with kindness, but with challenge. She welcomed it back. Their target was a mainland merchant vessel fat, with southern wine and grain. Harrick's crew slipped through a fog bank, silent as the dead. Yara was given a grappling hook and told to stay out of the way. She didn't. When the battle began, she climbed up the side of the merchant's hull with salt on her lips and hate in her hands. She found a guard twice her size and jabbed her dagger between the links of his mail. He died screaming, surprised. She took his axe. By the time the skirmish ended, the wine was theirs. So was the grain. So was the ship. Harrick approached her, bloodied and scowling. "You killed?" "Yes." "You afraid?" "No." "You stupid?" "Maybe." He snorted. "You'll do—" Word spread fast. The Kraken's daughter was reaving. Old sailors whispered about the girl who slit a throat before her 10th name day. Lords' daughters were supposed to be sheltered in halls with books and embroidery. Yara Greyjoy had salt in her bones and a scar down her forearm where the reaver's axe slipped from her grip during the raid. She kept the axe. On Pyke, Balon said little, but he let her sit at the high table now. Only once did he speak directly to her of legacy. "You're not a man, Yara, but you're Ironborn. That means you don't wait for things to be given. You take, you earn, you command." Like you." "No," he said. "Like Roderick, like Meryn. Better than me if you're worthy." That night she stood alone on the cliffs once more. The sea crashed far below, the stars blinking through the storm. She spoke softly into the dark. "What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder, stronger." And the sea roared back its approval. Chapter 3. Salt and Steel. By her 12th name day, Yara Greyjoy had earned a place most men twice her age never would, at the helm of a longship, even if only during drills. But she wanted more than drills. She wanted blood. She wanted steel. And she wanted to hear men obey her voice when the storm howled and the sails cracked like whips. The Eel Hunter was an old patchwork longship manned by has-beens and debtors, gifted to Yara by her father for one reason alone: no one else wanted it. "Learn on it," Balon said flatly, "or sink with it." Yara accepted it like a sword accepts a whetstone, without complaint. Her crew, however, was less accommodating. "They gave us a girl captain?" a grizzled oarsman named Smike spat. "She'll cry the first time a crossbow sings." "I don't cry," Yara said, standing on the deck with her salt-stained cloak and stolen axe. "But you'll bleed if you speak again." He did, so she made good on her word. The Eel Hunter took to sea the next dawn, barely seaworthy, groaning at every wave like an old whore with a broken back. The men muttered prayers to the drowned god. Yara only whispered to herself. Steel sings, salt heals, pain teaches. It became her mantra. They raided fishing villages along the western coast, nothing glorious but necessary. Salt wives smoked fish, worn leather, the odd southern blade. Not riches, but respect. One night, after a skirmish with Riverlanders turned sour, her crew accused her of arrogance. "You pushed too far," barked Smike, now with a broken nose and a grudge. "We lost 3 men for a sack of barley." Yara stood before them on the blood-slick deck, face bruised, eyes wild, voice cold as deep water. "You followed me. You live. You'll eat." She tossed the barley onto the deck with a thud. "Next time, if you want something easy, knit. Winter hit hard that year." Icy winds turned the sea to razors, and the Eel Hunter limped home after nearly capsizing in a squall. They docked in Lordsport with broken rigging and fewer oars than they left with. Balon was waiting. "Lost half your cargo," he said without looking up. "Lost 5 men," Yara corrected. "Did they die screaming?" "Yes. Then they died Ironborn." Weeks later, as the hull was patched, Yara walked alone through Pyke's lower halls. She paused at the armory and ran her fingers over the spears, swords, and axes hanging on the wall. Each one once belonged to a man of note, a Greyjoy of standing, or someone Balon had killed. She touched the hilt of a longsword with a ruby in its pommel. Roderick's. In the shadowed reflection of the blade she saw her own eyes, storm gray, stubborn, unblinking. What is dead may never die, but rises again, and claims what weak hands cannot hold. She wasn't quoting the right exactly. She was rewriting it. When spring thawed the docks, the Eel Hunter set sail once more, this time under Yara's own design. She stripped the ship bare, repainted it black, rechristened it Daggerfin, and handpicked the crew. No more whining old salts. These were younger men, tougher, leaner, hungry to prove themselves. She didn't want loyalty. She wanted fear that grew into respect. Their first major raid was on a coastal village that had been paying tribute to the Lannisters. Well guarded, well stocked. Yara attacked at night, in silence, striking with such viciousness that no alarms were raised until the corpses floated in the tide. They brought home gold, blades, 2 southern reavers, and a cage of green parrots that wouldn't stop squawking. Balon watched her disembark, his expression unreadable. "I expected you to fail," he admitted. "You were wrong," she said. "I often am. With daughters." She didn't flinch. That night, she dined alone in the tower of Naga's Hill, drinking black rum and staring out over the dark waves. The wind whispered through the stone. She thought of Theon, of Roderick, of the cradle she once rocked with lullabies that no one remembers. And then she rose, stood at the edge of the tower wall, and shouted into the abyss, "We do not sow." It echoed back from the cliffs, like the voice of a god who finally started listening. Chapter 4. Maiden of the Longship. The dagger fin cut through the sea like a blade through flesh. She wasn't the fastest ship in the Iron Fleet, nor the largest, but she had a soul, and it was Yara Greyjoy's. By 13, Yara no longer answered to anyone on her deck. Men who once mocked her now shouted her orders. She had become the youngest ship captain in the Iron Islands, and perhaps the most feared. Her name was spoken with a wary respect, like a knife one knows is sharp but hasn't yet tested. But glory is a jealous master, and the sea a fickle bride. It was dusk when they spotted the trade ship, a bloated cog flying Hightower colors, heavy with reach wine, linens, and grain. 3-1 they'll yield, said Rafe, her second, a skinny lad with quick hands and quicker bets. Yara scanned the horizon. 3-1 they'll fight. They've got steel on deck. Rafe shrugged. Then we'll bleed 'em and drink their wine. They didn't yield. The battle was fast and chaotic. Bolts flew like wasps. Grappling hooks thudded into wet wood. Men screamed. Yara led the boarding party, swinging down from the rigging like a sea demon, her axe already red before her boots touched the enemy deck. But something went wrong. Too many guards, better trained than expected. Rafe went down with a spear through his ribs. Yara's arm was sliced open from shoulder to elbow. She killed the man who did it, but by the end, 6 of her crew lay dead, and the ship was ablaze. They limped back to Lordsport with a cracked mast and a hold full of smoke-damaged grain. Barely a prize, barely a victory. Back at Pyke, Balon said nothing, which somehow hurt worse than insults, worse than the blood, worse than the screams. In the infirmary, Maester Orlan stitched her arm while a candle guttered in the damp. "You're lucky," he muttered. "Another inch and you'd be feeding crabs." "I'd rather drown than be lucky," Yara said. The maester raised an eyebrow. "You sound like your Uncle Aaron." Yara chuckled bitterly. "Aaron talks. I bleed." That night she stood before the sea once more, bandaged, broken, and furious. The drowned men held a prayer near the shore. Their voices echoed across the black rocks. What is dead may never die. Yara didn't join them. She stepped waist-deep into the freezing surf and stared into the horizon. And then she screamed, not in pain or rage, but in challenge. "Fix me, or finish me. Sink me, or let me rise." The sea, of course, said nothing, but it didn't take her either. Months passed. She rebuilt Daggerfin from the keel up, reinforced the hull, replaced the masthead with a carved kraken bearing a woman's face, fierce, snarling, teeth bared. Her crew grew leaner, tougher, meaner. No more children, no more passengers. Only killers. Her next raid struck deep into Westerland waters, far past where the Ironborn dared sail. They ambushed a Lannister scout ship and slaughtered every man aboard. She sent the captain's head to Pyke in a tarred box with a note. "We do not sow, we reap." Balon opened it in silence at the long table. Lord Hammerhorn leaned over his shoulder and grinned. "She's your daughter. She's Ironborn," Balon replied. "Blood's irrelevant." But his eyes lingered longer on the box than anyone else's. One evening, as her crew drank on the shore, a boy approached her tent with a blade in hand. 14, maybe 15, with fear behind his eyes and desperation in his step. "You're not fit to lead," he spat. "I should have had the helm." Yara stood. She didn't speak. She simply broke his wrist, disarmed him, and threw him into the surf. As he scrambled out, coughing and humiliated, she called after him. "You want the helm? Take it. But if you come at me again, come to kill, not to talk." He never came again. But 3 others did, months later, men who wanted to challenge her, best her, or just see her bleed. None of them walked away. And so her name spread beyond the islands. Yara Greyjoy, maiden of the longship, daughter of Kraken and Storm. No one called her girl anymore. And if they did, they didn't say it twice. Chapter 5. The silence between storms. The wind stilled. The raids quieted. The Kraken slept. For the first time in years, Yara Greyjoy was home, and she hated it. Pyke hadn't changed. The sea still thundered against the cliffs. The bridges still groaned under each step like they might snap and fling you to your death. But everything felt smaller now, slower. Yara had tasted the reach, burned gold from the Westerlands, spilled blood in the Dornish shallows. And now she was expected to sip stale ale in the great hall and play the part of a daughter? No, not her. She visited her mother's chambers for the first time in years. Alani sat by the window, staring out to sea as if still searching for Roderick's sails, or Maren's laugh, or Theon's cradle. She didn't look up. Theon would be 13 now, Yara said. Her mother blinked slowly. He liked honey on bread. I doubt he gets much in Winterfell. Alanis gave a tired smile. Neither do we. They sat in silence until the candle burned low. Balon summoned Yara to council that evening. Not a family supper, not a welcome home, a war table. We've bled long enough, he said, jabbing a knife into a map of Westeros. The wolves are distracted, the dragons are gone. The realm is cracked, and cracks let water in. The Ironborn lords nodded and grunted. Father, Yara said, voice even, you're planning another rebellion. I'm planning a return to form. You're planning a grave. He didn't strike her, but he dismissed her. That night she climbed to the top of Naga's Hill, where the ancient bones of sea dragons lay bleached and forgotten. Yara Greyjoy found her there, barefoot in the fog. You doubt him, he said. I see the cliff he's leaping from. The sea catches those it favors. Yara turned to him. The sea caught Roderick. The sea caught Maren. The sea drowned half my men. Aaron smiled like a man who knows drowning is coming and welcomes it. What is dead may never die. But rises again, Yara finished, without conviction. He placed a hand on her shoulder. The sea doesn't want the faithful to survive. It wants them to be worthy of survival. She didn't sleep. Instead, she roamed the castle, empty halls, echoes of brothers long buried, of a father always watching but never seeing. She found her old nursery, still locked. The cradle was gone. The toys were dust. But scratched into the stone above the window, nearly invisible, were 5 words. Yara plus Theon, salt and sky. She didn't remember carving it. But the words cut deep. 2 nights later, word reached Pyke that a Lannister convoy was approaching the coast. Slow, vulnerable, fat with silver and food bound for Old Town. Balon forbade a raid. Yara left anyway. The Daggerfin caught the Lannister convoy in a crescent moon night. No fires, no mercy. 3 ships burned, 2 captured. The rest fled. Yara stood on the deck of the lead ship, her blade dripping, her face splattered red. Tell Tywin Lannister, she said to the last man alive, the Iron Islands do not sleep. We drown in silence. Then we rise. She let him swim back alone. When she returned to Pyke, Balon stood on the dock, unsmiling. You defied me. I won. You risked open war. We're already at war. You're just too old to feel it. They stared at each other. Then Balon turned and walked away. That night the sea was calm. No wind, no storm, no blood, just silence. Yara sat alone by the fire, writing a letter to a boy she hadn't seen in over a decade. Theon, are you warm? Do they teach you to fight like an Ironborn or just how to kneel like a wolf? Do you remember my voice? I remember yours. It sounded like gulls in the morning. You cried when the tide rolled in. Then you laughed. I've killed 23 men since you left. One tried to say I was weak because I didn't have a beard. I buried an axe in his. Come home someday, or don't. But if you do, come as a Greyjoy. We do not sow, Yara. She folded it, burned it, watched the ashes drift into the waves. Chapter 6. The Kraken's Daughter. The black sail of the black wind rose like a banner of defiance above the dock at Lordsport. It was Balon's gift. Or test. No one was sure which. Either way, it was Yara's now. The black wind had no mercy in her bones. Sleek, dark, and fast, she cut across the sea like she was hunting something. 40 oars, reinforced hull, a ramming prow shaped like a kraken with its tentacles curling back across the bow. Yara ran her hand along its railing and smiled. This one's mine. Her crew was hand-picked. No legacy names, no favored sons of minor lords, no soft hands from Tower Hall. Only killers, drunks, exiles, and one woman named Brunn, who sharpened her blade on her teeth. Yara didn't want courtesy. She wanted loyalty and fear. Her first voyage with Black Wind took her to the Arbor, deep into enemy waters, where she ambushed a merchant fleet in the fog. 3 ships burned, 2 fled, 1 surrendered. The captain begged. Yara slit his throat and tossed his body into the sea, Let the drowned god weigh his worth, she told his crew. By the time she returned, she had 3 new banners nailed to her mast, a cargo hold full of golden arbor wine, and the heads of 4 would-be mutineers swinging from her yardarms. Balin met her on the dock again. "You want a lordship now, girl?" "No," Yara said. "I want another ship." He didn't smile, but he didn't say no. At feasts, the Ironborn lords began calling her Kraken's daughter, half with mockery, half with respect. She owned it, carved it into her new axe, had it embroidered into her sailcloth. When a drunken lord slurred it in jest during a feast, she broke his nose and forced him to drink seawater until he puked blood. No one joked again. In time, she became more than just a captain. She became a name, the kind mothers used to frighten their children, the kind whispered in war rooms in Old Town and Lannisport. And yet, still no word from the north, still no raven from Theon. Yara stopped writing letters she didn't send. She started carving stories into the hull of Black Wind instead. One raid nearly broke her. The coast near Flint's Finger, stony, cursed, and lightly defended, or so they thought. It was a trap, Lannister scouts, bolts from the cliffs, a burning net strung across the cove. Black Wind was nearly lost. Half her men died. Brunn was burned alive. Yara dragged a wounded deckhand through fire and smoke with one arm bleeding from shoulder to wrist. They limped back to Pyke, barely floating. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She reforged her axe and had Brunn's name carved into the tiller. Then she sailed again. That winter, in the drowned men's hollow beneath the cliffs, she stood barefoot in freezing water while Aeron poured seawater over her head. He chanted the rites. She said nothing. When it was over, she stood, dripping, shivering, hard-eyed. Aeron leaned close. "Do you believe now, niece?" "No," Yara said, "but the sea believes in me." He didn't argue. When she returned to Black Wind, her crew fell silent at the sight of her. She wore no armor, no cloak, just a salt-stained tunic and a belt of blades. "Where are we sailing, Captain?" one asked. Yara grinned. "Where the Krakens still hunt." They cheered. They followed. They never looked back. That night, as the stars danced above Pyke and the waves slapped the cliffs below, Yara stood on the bow of her ship, arms spread wide, wind in her hair. "What is dead may never die, but I am not dead, and I will not die, not until Theon comes home." Chapter 7. The Price of Command. The storm came fast. One moment the Black Wind was chasing gulls across a lazy dawn. The next, the sky cracked open like a broken helm, and the sea rose to meet it. Yara had seen storms, fought them, laughed in their faces. But this one wanted her dead. Waves taller than towers crashed down on the deck, sails shredded like parchment. Men were swept overboard, screaming, their armor dragging them into the dark. The mast cracked, then splintered. A yardarm fell, pinning 2 sailors. One lived. One did not. Yara stood at the helm, lashed to it with rope and sheer will, screaming orders through the wind. "Bail the hold, cut the lines, if you don't swim, you sink." They fought like Ironborn. But the sea did not care. By nightfall, Black Wind was barely afloat. 6 men dead, 10 injured. The ship was scarred, its ribs showing where the waves had bitten. And yet, they survived. Because Yara refused not to. They made landfall on a jagged rock known only as the Broken Step, a place too small for a map, too dangerous for a name. Just enough dry land to patch sails, mend wounds, and bury the dead. Yara stood over the bodies, silent, no prayers, no songs, just seawater poured from a helm onto each face. A quiet goodbye. Rafe, her new second, approached her later with a flask of black rum and a grim look. "We lost Branner," he said, "and Will, and Helg's son. I counted them. Helg wants to step down. Says the drowned god's taken his price." Yara took a long drink. "The sea always takes her due. Ever think maybe we pay too much?" She didn't answer. When they limped back into Lordsport, silence met them. No cheers, no drums, just men staring at what remained of the Black Wind, wondering how it still floated. Balon didn't come to the dock, but Aeron did. He offered her salt, bread, and water. She slapped it from his hands. That night, Yara sat alone in the war room, staring at the fleet map. She'd commanded 5 raids in 2 years. She'd lost 26 men. She'd taken thrice that in gold and weapons. But she felt no victory, just weight, heavy as a corpse dragged through the sea. In the days that followed, Belon summoned her to speak of rebuilding. You need stronger wood, better crew, more ships. I need to stop burying my men. Balon scowled. Then take fewer risks. You raised me to risk everything. I raised you to win. They stared at each other. Neither blinked, neither yielded. Yara returned to the docks with a crew half rebuilt and sails half patched. She held no ceremony, gave no rousing speech. She simply said, "The sea tried. We lived. Now we try back." They followed, because they were hers. But the raids were different now, sharper, colder, calculated. She stopped taking prisoners unless they had information. She started burning villages before they could sound alarms. She struck at night and vanished before the sun could name her. The Ironborn called her brutal. The mainlanders called her ghost. And when one of her men asked if she feared damnation from the drowned god, she replied, "If the sea wants my soul, it can come for it. But it better bring a bigger wave." One night she sat on the bow, legs dangling over the edge, writing names into the wood. Branner, Will, Helg's boy, Rafe, and Theon, still alive, somewhere, maybe not. She didn't care. She would find out. She would be there when he returned, or she'd die with salt in her lungs and steel in her hands. Chapter 8, The Old Way, Reborn. The sky bled orange as black wind returned to Pyke. The sails were whole, the crew hardened. The name Yara Greyjoy had become more than a whisper. It had become a warning. Across the western shores, lords and small folk alike spoke of the Lady Reaper, the Kraken's daughter, the one who did not burn, who took and never apologized. But reputation has a price. And the Ironborn were beginning to choose sides. In the halls of Pyke, the old lords gathered, salt-worn men with seaweed beards, rotted teeth, and voices like cracked rope. They remembered Roderick. They mourned Meryn. But they did not trust Yara. Not entirely. She is too young. She does not drown. She has no sons to leave behind. She fights like a man. She commands like a king, said Lord Drum, silencing them all. That, more than anything, terrified them. Word came that the Harlaws, the Good Brothers, and even some of the minor lords of Saltcliffe were quietly rallying. Not for war, for a kingsmoot, a rare and sacred rite. When no clear air existed, or when the Ironborn had grown restless, the captains gathered to choose their leader by voice and blood. And though Balon still breathed, the scent of succession was already thick in the air. Yara walked into the war hall during a feast and slammed a sax blade down onto the table. "You want a kingsmoot?" She growled. "Call it." Silence. Balon looked at her with an unreadable gaze. "You wish to be Queen of Salt and Rock?" he asked. "I wish to be the captain who does not drown." Some men laughed. Most did not. The kingsmoot was set for a moon's turn later, on Old Wick, the ancient island of ritual, sacrifice, and salt-throne legend. The place where the first Iron King had worn a crown of driftwood and slaughtered his own brother to keep it. Yara arrived early, with black wind, with her best men, with her blade sharpened and her pride buried deep enough to keep her alive. She did not expect to win. She expected to survive. 14 captains made their claim. Old men with broken backs and ancient grudges. One claimed to have spoken to the drowned god in a dream. Another waved around a shrunken stark head that smelled of lies. Yara waited, then stepped forward. No armor, no cloak, just salt on her skin and blood under her nails. She spoke plainly. "I am Yara Greyjoy. I was 8 when the sea took my brothers. I was 9 when it took my mother. I was 10 when my father gave away my only brother. I was 13 when I killed my first man, 14 when I took my first ship, 15 when I burned my first Lannister convoy, 16 when I lost half my crew and stood at the helm anyway. I have not drowned, I have not knelt, I have not been broken. I am the Ironborn you pretend to be, and I do not ask for your crown. I dare you to try and take it." Silence. Then a cheer, a chant. "Yara, Yara, Yara," but not from everyone. Old Lord Dunstan Drum stepped forward, blade in hand. "Fight me then, girl." She didn't wait for another word. The duel was savage. Drum was old but heavy-handed and brutal. He swung like a hammer. Yara fought like a knife. He broke her ribs. She broke his wrist. He bit her ear. She drove a dagger into his thigh, and when he stumbled, bleeding, muttering curses, she grabbed him by the beard, pulled his face to hers, and whispered, "We do not sow, but we harvest well," then slit his throat. She didn't win the king's moot. Too many old men feared change. But she didn't lose either. She walked off that beach with black wind behind her and 100 new loyalists watching her back. Yara Greyjoy approached her that night, still soaked from his endless baptisms. "You bled for the old way," he said. "You rose." "I didn't rise for the gods," Yara said. "I rose for myself." He nodded. "That's what the drowned god wants." By morning, the Iron Islands hadn't changed, but the wind had. It carried her name now. Not as a whisper, but as a promise. Chapter 9. Ghosts of Pyke. The sea was calm, too calm. The black wind sat in Pyke's harbor, sails furled, her crew restless. The docks creaked, but no orders came. The Kraken waited. So did Yara. Inside the towering black stone of her family's stronghold, silence had returned. But not the comfortable kind. This was the silence of rot. The silence of something old and terrible beginning to fester. Balon Greyjoy had grown strange. He walked the halls at night speaking to shadows. He muttered names no one recognized. Roderick, Merron, even Theon, as if his ghost had slipped back in through the cracks in the walls. He refused food some days. On others, he demanded new ships be built with gold they didn't have. Yara watched and waited. Her mother was worse. Alanis had stopped speaking entirely. She sat curled in a window seat, rocking slowly, her lips moving in endless prayer to a god who drowned his faithful. The room reeked of salt and mildew. Yara knelt before her once, just once, and whispered, "I don't know what I'm becoming." Alanis only smiled faintly and said, "Something the sea will not eat." It was the last thing she ever said. When the raven came from the citadel with the seal of Maester Gorman, it bore the name of a Greyjoy Yara had tried to forget. Theon. Alive. Grown. Held as a ward still, but training with swords, writing his own name, speaking of war. The letter said he was to return soon, if only briefly, to reaffirm House Greyjoy's loyalty and name. Yara read it twice, then burned it. That night she wandered through Pyke's oldest wing, a forgotten place, half collapsed, half haunted. The walls were damp, the air thick with mold and memory. She found a child's cloak still hanging on a peg. Theon's, dusty, torn, soft. She took it, wrapped it around her shoulders, and cried, not loud, not long, but it came. The first tears in a decade. The next day she climbed to the bridge connecting the two highest towers, where the sea howled beneath like it hungered for more dead Greyjoys. Balon stood there, staring down. "I remember the sound," he said, voice like gravel. "When Roderick's body came home, Merron never did. Theon, he's not dead, but he's not Ironborn either. He's my brother," Yara said quietly. "Is he?" Balon asked, turning to her with eyes full of ghosts. "Would you kill him if I asked?" She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Balon turned away. The sea doesn't weep for what it takes, and neither should we. Later that night, he ordered a raven sent to Winterfell. Let the boy return. Yara went to the docks alone. No crew, no blades. She walked to the edge of the pier and looked out at the horizon, where the first hint of a Stark banner might one day appear. "Come home," she said under her breath. "Come home so I can hate you in person." Then she returned to the black wind and ordered every inch of her ship polished, repaired, blessed, and armed. Not for war, but for family. In the lower halls of Pyke, Aaron waited for her. He led her into a chamber she had never seen. Lit with blue flame, the walls covered in kelp-draped relics, salt-crusted bones, and weapons long since rusted. "This was your grandfather's hall," he said. "What happened to him? The sea forgot him. So did his people." Aaron held out a curved blade wrapped in black leather. His knife. "Your birthright. I already have a blade. This one's not for blood. It's for memory." Yara took it, sheathed it at her side, walked out without another word. She spent that night alone on the deck of her ship, staring at the stars. One by one, her crew came to sit beside her. They said nothing, but they were there, because she was. When dawn broke, the wind shifted, not much, just enough to carry with it the scent of something old and someone returning. Chapter 10, Brother of Mine. The tide was low. The gulls circled, screaming. The Iron Islands woke to a gray morning, the kind that made bones ache and ships cautious. But on the dock at Pyke, every eye was turned toward the horizon. A Stark ship approached, small, stark gray sail, trimmed with black, no banners, no fanfare. But Yara knew. She knew before she saw his face, before she saw the shape of his shoulders, before she saw the way he stood too straight, like someone had trained the Ironborn out of him. Theon Greyjoy had come home. She didn't wait on the dock like a queen. She stood on the pier like a reaver, boots planted wide, axe at her back, hands at her belt, cloak flapping in the wind. No smile, no tears, no warmth, not yet. The ship bumped gently against the mooring post. The gangplank lowered. Theon stepped off with a northern sword on his hip and leather boots polished by servants. His hair was longer than she remembered. He wore a stiff expression, something carved and rehearsed. He looked around, sniffed the air, then saw her, stopped. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Yara raised an eyebrow. "You gonna kneel?" she asked. Theon blinked. Yara, in the flesh, you look... Don't finish that sentence, little brother. Not if you want to keep your teeth. They walked the shore together in silence. He stumbled a little, unused to the slick rocks, the smell, the sea pulling at his ears. Pyke had not waited for him. The islands had no memory of boys who traded salt for snow. But Yara remembered every scar, every lullaby, every bitter night spent wondering if he died wearing a wolf's cloak. She didn't say any of it. She just walked beside him, like she used to. When they reached the cliff's edge, Theon paused. The sea below was violent that day, frothing and wild. "I dreamed of this," he said. "Coming back." Yara crossed her arms. "Did you dream of me cutting your throat for wearing Stark colors?" Theon chuckled nervously. "No, but I thought about it. You should have sent word. I was afraid. Of me?" "No," he said, "of not being welcome." Yara stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You weren't..." They stood in silence, the wind clawing at their cloaks. Then Theon reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to her. She opened it. A child's toy kraken, wooden, scratched, old. "I kept it," he said. "Since Winterfell. It was mine, wasn't it?" Yara looked down at the little thing in her hand. "I gave it to you the day you left." He nodded. "I don't remember that. I do..." She closed the cloth, tucked it into her belt, and looked back at the sea. "You're not the boy I remember, and you're not the sister I left." "Good," she said, "because we're not children anymore." Later, at the feast in the great hall, Balon said little. He barely looked at Theon. The food was cold, the drink was sour, but Yara sat beside her brother, and when a lord called him Stark's whelp, she broke a jug over his head. And no one said anything after that. That night, Theon came to her quarters, quiet and hesitant. "I don't know if I belong here," he said. "You don't," Yara replied. He looked at the floor. "But that doesn't matter," she added, "because I do, and you're mine. And if the sea tries to take you again..." She leaned close, forehead against his. "I'll take you back. Every time, until it drowns trying." At dawn, they stood together on the bow of the black wind, salt on their skin, steel on their belts, storm in their blood. For the first time in 10 years, the siblings were together, not as hostages of war, not as ghosts of grief, but as Ironborn. "What is dead may never die," Yara whispered. "But rises again," Theon said, voice steady, harder and stronger. The end. Author's note: Yara Greyjoy, Lady of the Iron Islands, is more than just a story about ships, steel, and storm. It's about identity, about being born into a world that tries to define you, contain you, even drown you, and rising from it harder and stronger. Yara was always one of the most underrated characters in the Game of Thrones universe. Not because she wasn't fierce, we saw that plainly, but because we never truly got to witness her rise. Her pain, her losses, her loyalty, her command, and most of all, her love for a brother taken, for a family broken, and for a homeland that only ever respected the sound of an axe hitting bone. This story is my attempt to give her the depth she always deserved, to write a girl forged in salt and fire who didn't need dragons or prophecy to matter. Just grit, blood, and the ability to look death in the eye and say, "Try again. Thank you for joining me on this voyage." If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment. Let me know your favorite chapter or the moment Yara claimed her place in your heart. And remember, what is dead may never die, but it can sure as hell make for one epic tale. Brian M. Brumbaugh.